There we go.
Good evening and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. We're just going to pause for a few moments and let everyone into the meeting, and then we'll get started. Good evening. Welcome to those of you just joining us. We're just letting everyone in, so we'll pause for a few moments and then we'll get started. Good evening. We are just letting everyone into the meeting and then we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us for Northern Kentucky History Hour, episode 17. All right. Well, my name's Tara Johnson-Noem, and I'll be your host tonight for Northern Kentucky History Hour. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am a member of Behringer-Crawford Museum's Board of Trustees, and we are so thrilled to be able to offer Northern Kentucky History Hour to all of you. And this is our 17th episode, like I said. So many of you we've seen each week coming back, and we are so grateful for your support. We're grateful for the museum staff, all the other trustees that have been very supportive of this project. And of course, we are thankful for our financial supporters. Thank you so much to the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation, and especially to all of our members. We've had a number of individuals join as a result of this program, and we are grateful that you support us in that way. If you're not yet a member of the museum, you can call or you can go to bcmuseum.org and learn more. There's special programming for museum members and just a lot of exciting things going on. So please consider becoming a member today. So before we begin, let's go over a few reminders. Let's see here. There we go. First of all, everyone's microphone, except for myself and Ms. Kreinbrink, have been muted. But that does not mean that we don't want you to participate in this conversation. So at the bottom of your screen, or maybe the top, depending on your device, you'll see the chat button. And so we hope that you will add questions, comments to the chat so that we can find out what you're thinking. And there will be a time during Jeannine's presentation, there will be a quiz. And so the first person to answer the quiz correctly will receive one of these awesome little Northern Kentucky History Hour buttons. We've already mailed out lots of them to former winners, and of course, bragging rights, which is very important. So, so get your keyboard ready when the quiz comes up, and good luck to everybody on that. Also, later in the presentation, I will be adding a link to this year's premier fundraiser for Behringer-Crawford Museum. It's the way that we raise funds for all of our youth programming called Fresh Art. Normally, Fresh Art is a lovely gala event at the museum in DeVue Park. Unfortunately, because of social distancing requirements, we are having to move that to a virtual event this year, but our local artist community has already come out in support and created amazing works of art, paintings, pottery, jewelry, wood cuttings and bowls, lots of things to cherish and to make your own. And so I will be putting a link later on so that you can go to that part of the website and check it out. Bidding has begun, and the final day of bidding will culminate in a live auction on October 4th. Okay, so let's meet tonight's speaker. Ms. Jeannine Kreinbrink is the president and senior partner at K&V Cultural Resources Management, Inc., which she co-founded in 2011 with Doug Van Stroh. She has combined a career in cultural resource management with conducting educational and public programming in archaeology, preservation, and history. Her archaeology career began at NKU and in volunteering at BCM, actually, where she's been an associate archaeologist since 1981. She began a full-time career as an archaeologist in 1986, working on urban archaeology in Covington. Jeannine obtained her master's in 1992 from UC, where she wrote her master's thesis on the archaeological sites first excavated by Ellis Crawford when he was Behringer-Crawford Museum's director. Jeannine helped found and has served on the board of the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum since its opening in 2005. She serves on the board of directors for Friends of Big Bone. For many years, Jeannine also taught as an adjunct professor to the anthropology and history departments at Northern Kentucky University from 1997 to 2014. Born and raised in Ellesmere, Jeannine has lived in South Carolina and Ohio. She and her husband Anthony built an earth-sheltered house in Boone County in 1994 and have lived there ever since. Their daughter and her family live in Austin, Texas. I am so pleased to have her back again as our guest. And Jeannine, I am going to get the video over to you here in just a second. Welcome, Jeannine.
All right, thank you. All right, so are we ready to share the screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's go ahead and get this shared. All right. All right, can you see it now?
Yes, it looks great. If you wanted to do full slideshow, you can, but
here we go. It should be good.
That's
now.
it.
Excellent. All right, welcome everyone. Tonight we are going to talk about, in the days of the Grand Water Power, the rise and fall of the grist mill industry in Boone, Kenton, and Campbell counties. And I will say this project started a very long time ago. I've just recently picked it back up again, try to add a little bit more information. I need to probably real quick thank Behringer-Crawford Museum, Boone County Preservation Review Board, and the Kentucky Heritage Council. Heritage Council and Boone County funded the original research on a very long time ago. In the 1990s is when I first started doing this research, and especially on the mill that we call the Grand Water Power, and you'll see why here in a little while. All right, let's get started. We're going to start with a discussion of just some introductory stuff, so some things will make sense later. The picture that you see on the slide is a picture of the Grand Water Power, obviously in ruins. You can see the very large wheel and all of the stonework. When I first went there, the stonework was still there, but all of the wood superstructure and the wheel were gone. This is an older picture that was shared with me by the landowners whose family had owned the property for most of the 20th century. So let's talk a little bit about mills, and we're going to mostly be talking about grist mills, and these are the mills that were used to grind wheat and corn or other grains into flour. And there are multiple different kinds of mills and how they were powered. And first we'll talk about water power. There are two types of wheels for water powered. First is the undershot wheel, where you can see in the upper left of the screen where the water is along the bottom of the wheel and turns the wheel clockwise. And that's called an undershot wheel. And there's a picture of one down there in the lower left, and another picture in the upper right for examples. I haven't found any examples that I know of around here that are undershot wheels. Most of them are overshot, which is the next slide. So in an overshot wheel, the water is elevated, and you can see where the water is coming across. There's a overflow here, but the water comes across, hits the wheel, and then turns it this way, or depending on how you set it up. your wheel and your water flow. And this is an example of an overshot wheel. And this is how it works. So you have a water source. So here's a stream coming in. You have a pond with a mill dam, and sometimes that mill dam can be very tall. The one at the Grand Water Power is at least 10 to 12 feet tall, and they're usually made out of stone. Usually you start with some type of a ravine, and you might dam it up. You've got an extra spillway coming off, and you have a sluice, and you can see the elevated. And if you've been to the ones down, say, in the Smoky Mountains, the different mills down there, those are all overshot, and you can see how they elevate the sluice, and there's a gate, and then the water flows, and then the overflow goes back down away from the mill. And you can see how these are laid out as an example here. So there are two types of millstones, and we're going to talk about these because the mill that we were working on has this type, the French Burr, depending how you want to spell it, type of millstone. And Burr stone is a silicified limestone. It's very hard. It has fossils and silica and cavities in it, and it was mined in France, and it was considered the best for grinding. And if you could afford it, you bought French millstones. And these are some examples. But by the early 19th century, the French quarries became depleted. So they cut the pieces into smaller. You see these are all separate pieces in the millstones, and they bound them together with iron around the outside. And they called those French Burr millstones. And you'll see some pieces of that here in a little while. The other kind, come on. Why are you not advancing? There we go. The other kind of millstone are solid ones. And these are generally made of similar silicified limestone or similar stone that has a good kind of rough surface for grinding. And they cut grooves, and you see an example of someone doing that in the lower right, to channel the ground flour. And these stones, whether it's the French Burr pieced ones or the solid ones, come in two pieces. You have the base or bed stone that does not move, and the upper stone is called the runner stone. And that's the stone that turns around, and as the grain comes in the hole at the top center, it's ground and then channeled out through the different runners on the stone. The other kind that we'll be talking about shortly in a more generic sense are steam-powered mills. By the 1840s, the development of the steam engine began to change the character of the local milling industry. And by the last of the quarter of the 19th century, all but a very few of the mills serving Boone, Campbell, and Kenton County were by then steam powered. If they could afford it, they switched to steam power. It was more reliable. You could run all year. A lot of the water powered mills could only run 3 or 4 years when there was enough water in the streams to power the wheels. There's an example of a steam powered mill down here, and these are all pieces of machinery from the different kinds of mills. All right, so here's the quiz question up in the upper right in the bold. Who had the earliest documented grist mill in what is now Campbell County? So not counting the Kenton County part to begin with. In what is now Campbell County, who had the earliest documented grist mill? And we'll answer that later. So here's just a list of some other early mills in Boone County, Humphrey Marshall, and I've got maps later on. These are just some short list. On Middle Creek, a man named Garnett, first name unknown, but I think it was Robert Seabury on Wolper Mill, which is listed as a horse mill. And you can see the illustration here to the right, where these poor horses or mules walked around in a circle all day long to grind the grain on the millstone in the center. And Julius Rouse had a mill along Gunpowder by US 18 near Limaberg Road. And I found a very interesting report that talked about how the US Army blew up, literally exploded, blew up his mill on September 15th, 1862, because he had reportedly been supplying corn and wheat to the Confederate Army, who was camped at Snow's Pond over on US 25. There's a description of the millstones and all the machinery flying up into the air because they literally blew up the entire building. I've not seen any confirmation of that, but that's a story that's told in Boone County. Campbell County, we have John Nelson out at Flag Spring, John Grant on Pond Creek, or possibly or Grassy Creek, and John Gupser, of course, at Gupser Mills after 1844 when he arrived in the area, and he actually bought the mill from William DeMoss in 1865, and he's listed as a miller in 1870. And we're going to talk about the difference between people's names associated with mills and how they're listed in the census records later. And another man named Moses Grant before 1845, and that location is uncertain at the moment. Still working on that one. In Kenton County, I've got an early example. This is a very early one, 1796 on Banklet Creek, 1/4 of a mile up from the confluence with the Licking River. James Taylor bought this property. It's a little more complicated than that because there was multiple people running the mill or claiming to own it before that, but he bought it in 1810, and he did not settle all the landowner disputes until between 1825 and 1830. Other parties included John Crittenden, John Harris, and Raleigh Colston, all of whom were major land grant holders in the vicinity after the Revolutionary War. And as many of you know, many of these land grants overlapped each other, and they were always filing suit against each other, trying to get all their borders and land property boundaries figured out. Took many of them a very long time. But in 1856, James Taylor's daughter, also named Keturah, same as his wife, sold this land. And you can see different property lines on here, and they divided up the property. And my arrow has gotten misplaced, but it should be right here. If you look where I'm making a circle, my arrow got misplaced. The mill is marked on this map. And you can see it right here where it says mill. And so here's the Licking River's flowing toward the top of the page. Here is the creek making this wonderful turn and coming down and going to the river. Now, if we look at a map, aerial photo from today or recently, here's 17, here's Howard Litzler. Here is that same bend. Well, actually the river, it's flowing this way, so we'll go this way. Is that bend in the Banklet Creek heading over right over this way to the Licking. That mill would be somewhere in here. So now I'm wondering if maybe there's not something still there. At some point, maybe try to get a look at that. So that's not one. All right. So now we are getting to, hold on, I went too far. Go back, back one more. There we go. All right. My problem here is, bear with me, I have my laptop open so I can follow my slides, and I keep thinking when I hit my mouse, I'm moving the slides on my laptop. And I'm not. I'm moving this one. All right. So here is a picture of a sidewall of the Chrysler Gully Mill. It is named for the first owner, the first miller, and it is named for the family who owned the property through most of the 20th century. A relative owns it now, but their name's not Gully. But they had requested that the name Gully be put onto the name of it. And It's called the Grand Water Power because that is how at least one of the landowners, one of the millers, referred to it in the 1840s. Here's a picture as we found it, and you can see those are pieces, all the white stones are pieces of the French Burr millstones that had come apart. Here's some of the machinery still there. And you can see the amazing stonework from it. Here is a couple of maps. The top is a Google map. And you can see Camp Ernst Road going north. If you're familiar with Camp Ernst Road, here, as you follow my arrow, you're coming down a very steep hill. And at the bottom of the hill, you cross Gunpowder, and then you go back up the hill. And the Boy Scout camp is all over here. And Gunpowder Creek Nature Park is up here in the green. These little brown lines that I've drawn, this is the existing driveway or road that goes back to the property. And this is now a driveway, but a remnant of an old road. And if you look down at the 1883 atlas on the bottom, so we're going to follow the same road. So we're coming north. See this little cemetery, little family cemetery that's still there back here. And now you see a split. Well, the dash split is in general, this right here is the current route of Camp Ernst Road. And we cross here and we come up the hill. And you see this bend is still here. Oh, go back. This bend is still there as you come up the hill and swing around. Now, if we come back down here, we're going to go up here to the northwest where we're following the beginning of this. And then we're going to keep going that way. So we come up here and we come right over here and you see G mill for grist mill right there. And you see this line that comes across, that is the mill race. And it comes across right through this narrow little peninsula between the two parts of Gunpowder Creek. So it makes this big giant loop and comes right across here, flowing this way. And here is a drawing. It's fascinating what they did. Now I'm guessing there was a natural break because here's a ridge top, here's a ridge top, here's the creek flowing this way. So it's flowing north. There is a sluice gate. So there's a stone built gate right here at the edge of the creek. They literally cut this hill, and this is probably 30 feet tall. Now, like I said, I'm guessing there was a natural break, but they literally cut all the way through this hill to make the mill race. Comes down here to a pond, which is now dried up and filled in. Very large stone wall dam. Here are the gristmill ruins. The mill race continues. There are sawmill ruins down here. And then the water flowed back out and across the field to either irrigate the fields or to run back, and Gunpowder Creek runs south right over here. So this is that little peninsula here. And here's the mill pond. And here's the mill pond. So it's fascinating. We found some old homestead sites up here. And you can see where I have old roads marked on here. You could still follow these roads through the woods. So these roads would have gone north, one up to Burlington, and another one up probably a little bit, picks up 18 a little bit further to the northwest. And then here is the close-up shot. I'm going to read a little bit now. So one of the sites is the stone foundation of the grist mill. Foundation is a massive stone construction built of dry laid cut limestone blocks. And the second site is a number of stone piles, which was in the previous slide over here, which includes stone piles and a possible corner pier from a sawmill located several hundred feet to the southwest. A stone sluice gate is the first structure and stands at the edge of Gunpowder Creek. Over here. One segment of the mill race connects the creek and the sluice gate with the mill pond and the grist mill, and that race is now visible in two different areas. There's approximately 290 feet that's still there, here, the black dots, and another 135-foot section over here below the grist mill. The dam is composed of cut limestone blocks, is 115 feet wide. At the tallest point today, the dam is over 9 feet high with at least 21 courses of dry laid limestone block.
Where can I find volume for this thing?
The mill complex is situated on a meander of Gunpowder Creek in that narrow isthmus created by the curve of the stream, and they cut the race from one side of the meander to the other. So the foundation, and there's a couple pictures. I've got some more pictures here coming up. Here's another close-up of the one with the wheel still there. And then this is what we found. And the wheel would have been here. Dry laid right now, the stonework ranges from 10 to over 30 courses in height. It was a structure 40 by 32 feet with an average foundation height of 8 to 10 feet. And the terrace had been cut to provide a level spot for the mill. And the north side of the foundation had been built against this cut, at least 8 feet high as the current height. There was at least one doorway opening on two sides. In the southeast corner, which is this corner here, had a large stone buttress that supported the wood flume that fed the Overshot Wheel. Stonework dipped in the middle to provide access to the wheel from inside the mill building, and that's here. This, the old photograph that we just looked at, there we go, shows the location of the wheel and the wooden framing and the opening of the foundation. It clearly shows the configuration of the wheel and its relationship to the interior of the structure. Inside, the foundation included an interior footer for an interior wall. 3 hand-hewn wood beams still lay in the interior as well. Fragments of the French Burr stones were still there, and an iron cog, as we had seen earlier, was still there. So behind the grist mill, the continuation had been cut into the terrace. And this is the mill race that's sort of filled in that comes from the sluice gate over toward the dam. You can see the big cut in the hill. It's obviously eroded into it. Here's some other pictures of the foundation. This in the back here, this is part of the dam where my arrow is. That's part of the dam. And here are the, oops, come back. These are the Sawmill Ruins that are, so you can see the coming through here, the mill race, and then these are Sawmill Ruins. Only a few foundation piers still exist from the sawmill. No evidence of any wheel type or how it was powered has been found. And then we lose the race as it goes across the fields over toward the southward flowing part of Gunpowder Creek. It could be that they used the water for watering their fields. All right. So let's do a little bit of history. You see what's up on the screen. I'm going to read some of this as well. Lewis Chrysler was probably the first miller, or at least the first landowner. Excuse me, I have to get a drink. He bought 272 acres in 1817 and 40 acres in 1828, all right there on Gunpowder Creek. He was very active in the local Baptist church and actually donated land for the Forks of Gunpowder Church, which was upstream. And he and his family are listed in the 1820 and the 1830 census. Unfortunately, those census records don't list the occupations of the landowner, so we're just presuming that he was the actual miller. In 1834, he sold all his land to Alfred and Joseph Chambers, and the deed included, quote, the residence and mills of said Lewis Chrysler, which implies that the grist mill and the sawmill were both operational during this time period. Based on other records, it appears that Chrysler and his family apparently moved out of state to Shelby County, Indiana. Alfred and Joseph Chambers only owned it for 2 years, and they sold to John Riddle and Job Popham in 1836, and that deed references the mill on said place. They only held it for a month when they sold it to a man named Jeremiah Garnett, not the same Garnett, I think brother probably of the Garnett I mentioned earlier. Garnett owned the land and mill until 1843. Whether Garnett was the miller, I'm not sure, because the 1840 census also does not list occupations. He probably was, though. 1843, Garnett sold to Stephen and William Graves, and that deed in 1843 says the mill was known as the Grand Water Power with all the mill's improvements and appurtenances. So they were thinking pretty grand here, and it's possible that they're the ones who built up all the stonework. I don't know who actually built it. It could have been as early as Chrysler. Later on, it's referred to as Chrysler's Mill in other documents. So it's definitely identified with Lewis Chrysler through most of this time period. So I'm guessing he's the one maybe that named it. I made that sign, you know, as you came down the road that said the Grand Water Power as you pulled up in your wagon with all your corn or your wheat in the back. Well, Stephen Graves, and just a couple of years later in 1848, he split off 65 acres, including the mill, and sold a half share back to Job Popham. And they actually did a land swap because I actually excavated Job Popham's grave some time ago. And he died up near the airport. So they did a land swap for this property. And Job Popham was a miller. He may have been the miller the whole time. I don't know. I know in 1850, he was the miller and he made enough money to make the manufacturing schedule for that year with a capital investment of $3,000, which is what the land is valued at. And he processed 3,600 pounds of flour that year, valued at $8,000. 2 employees not named, which were probably his sons. He had 2 sons in their early 20s. There's no mention of a sawmill in 1850, so that may not have been operational. Only one other mill made the manufacturing schedule in 1850, and you had to gross $2,000 to make the manufacturing schedule. And that was William Snyder, who had the very large flour mill at Petersburg, which continued. And there's another view looking down into the foundation from the upper level. By 1860, even though I'm not really quite sure if he actually owned the property, a man named Andrew Pyles was the miller, and he did not make enough money to get into the manufacturing schedule. Job Popham died in 1863, apparently still owning his 50% share. And the deeds in the court cases get kind of complicated here. But in summary, Stephen Graves, the other 50%, died in 1864. So these two died within a year of each other. And Andrew Pyles filed a claim against Graves' estate, claiming ownership of the 65-acre mill property. And it went back and forth in court all the way until after his death. And he was listed as a farmer in 1870. So if he was still the miller, he wasn't making enough money to identify himself as that, or he had somebody else running the mill. So there are more claims and lawsuits all the way up until 1886, when Andrew Pyles' widow finally won a claim, and they were forced, this property was sold, and in that sale, and you can see down at the bottom, it calls it the old mill. So we're presuming that means at least by 1886, the mill was not operational anymore. It certainly wasn't making enough money to get into the records. No mill at that location showed up in the manufacturing schedules for 1870 or 1880. It may have operated on a small scale. We don't really know. I do know on that 1883 atlas, and we'll come back to that picture in a few minutes, that a man named Weaver, right where Camper's Road crosses Gunpowder, there was a mill there owned by a man named Weaver, and he converted to steam by 1850 or 1860. And he took over the milling business for that part of the county. All right. Come on. There we go. Okay. Paul, I know you're in here. You'll never guess that's the Weisenberger Mills in Midway, Kentucky, in that lower left picture. Put that in there just for you. All right. Local mill contacts. You can see by 1850, there were only 4 mills between Boone, Kenton, and Campbell that made the $2,000. 1860, there's 3. By 1870, there are 14 mills, and 16 in 1880, and look how many of them are steam. So the grist mills, the water-powered ones, could not compete with the steam-powered mills. And if you had enough money to switch over, so we can see that list. How are we doing on time? We're doing all right. All right. I have some of the different 1883 atlases here, and I thought I would run through these. I've got arrows showing the mills that I could find on here, whether these were all active or not. I'm still getting back into trying to figure out who owned each one of them. If you see on Burlington up here on Wolper Creek, it says Old Mill. Here is our grist mill here, and here is the Weaver Mill, but you can see how close they are. And Weaver set himself up in direct competition right over here where the road came down to Gunpowder Creek. So we're starting with Boone County in 1883. I found 11 mills on the atlas maps, plus 2 shown as Old Mill, like that one up on Wolper Creek. Of the 11, 6 of them had sawmills also. 5 of them at least had steam mills associated with it. So we don't really know how many of these were still operating, because we know this one probably was not operating. The 1880 census, though, only lists 4 mills, 2 water and 2 steam. 2 of these are on Middle Creek. 1 is down in the Hamilton precinct, and 1 is in Pleasant Ridge. So here's Burlington precinct. Here's Petersburg. Of course, I don't have the arrow, but there was the big one in Petersburg. Here's another one up here to the north. Bellevue, we have Roberts Mill over here, down up from the Ohio. And if you look at all these, I want to do a study here at some point and look at the different creeks. If you were going to try to run a mill most of the year, you had to have a permanent water flow, and you had to have the right slope to get enough water so it wasn't just sitting there stagnant. And so most of these mills, they're not right down by the river. They're up on the creek, up in the creek valleys that are fairly narrow, so you get a good water flow coming through. So it's kind of interesting. Here's one in Florence, or Florence Crossroads. This is the Rouse Mill, Julius Rouse over here. That's the Rouse family that I had mentioned before, that must have rebuilt, or someone else built one right down there next to it. Walton, we have several, and down here in Walton, there's McCoy's Fork, Mudlick Creek, and then here's a sawmill actually that I marked. And here's Walton. Verona, we have one up here. And in Campbell County, in 1883, there are 5 mills on the atlas map. One is a sawmill that also had a grist mill in 1880. We have names like John Willenbrink, William Arnold, J.R. Morris in Flag Spring, and of course, John Gupser on 12 Mile Creek. And here's one down here. A lot of these don't tell you the name of who owned it, so it's kind of tricky trying to figure it out sometimes. Here is Gupser's mill in the Gupser Mill precinct. In Alexandria, we have this one over here. And in Kenton County, there are 4 mills and 1 old mill on the atlas. One was Snyder's on Baglet Creek, and that one's in the census records. One was shown as a grist mill on the atlas, but as a steam mill in the census records, and that's Keeney's Mill on a place called Steep Creek. One mill owned by a man named Temple in Visalia Station, and one in Spring Garden, I think that's Vance, and the old mill on Bullock Pen Creek. However, the census records show 8 steam-powered grist mills for Kenton County, but only 3 are on the atlas that I've been able to find. 5 of them are shown as being in Covington. So they were obviously creating the steam probably by burning wood or coal at this point. So they're not listed on the atlas map. Here's Independence with one down there at the bottom. This is the interesting one because here, excuse me, here is the mill. The nearest landowners are Lamb and Keeney, and neither one are listed as millers. They're both listed as farmers. And nobody within 2 census pages are listed as a miller. So it's possible, as I keep looking into some of these, that a lot of these maybe were not operational anymore. All right. So by the end of the 19th century, the milling industry was rapidly declining in northern Kentucky. It was obviously not an easy occupation. Nature was a constant threat, plus the beginning of the Industrial Revolution provoked numerous mill closings in northern Kentucky. Many millers on the water-powered mills, which they switched to steam, could only run for certain times in the year. The mills could get washed away, dams destroyed. Lack of rainfall and drought was a big problem for many of the water-powered mills. The mill was dependent on continuous water supply, and the farmer's good fortune could not economically continue under these conditions. The Industrial Revolution and development of the railroad clinched the demise of the small water-powered mills through the second half of the 19th century. Large industrialized commercial mills using steam power allowed for the manufacture of wheat and other products than the small rural mill, making it no longer a vital part of the economy. The large mill in Petersburg essentially took over for most of Boone County, all of the flour milling by the later part of the 19th century. And the steam mills that were in Covington, and I'm sure Newport did the same thing. I know Dorsal Flour Mill was one that operated in Newport in the later part of the 19th century and up through the 20th century as well. And that's all I have for now. We've got questions, and then we'll have the quiz answer here shortly. Back to you.
Awesome. That was so interesting. So I have a couple questions. One of which, so I'm looking at these incredible photographs. I'm assuming these are on private property. Can you talk a little bit about, the condition today? It's a little hard. I wasn't sure, are they still in the condition kind of the photos or?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have not been there in a long time. It is on very private property.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back a very long private road. So, but no, I thought about going and checking, but I have not been there for quite a long time. I'm
Interesting.
hoping it's still in the same condition.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you mentioned the ones in the Smoky Mountains, which I have actually bought some whole wheat flour from the one in the Smokies, and they talk a little bit about sort of the restoration of that mill, and I would think that it would be really challenging once kind of weather starts taking its toll. How were the stones put together? Because are they mortared, or was it more of like a dry stack
They're
stone?
all dry laid.
Wow.
The building and the dam, it's all dry laid stone. And whoever built it knew they were stonemasons. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They got the corners. I mean, you can see corners are all shaped. If you look at the corner here, these are all trimmed on the outside. And they had used the building as a barn, I think, through most of the first 60 years, at least of the 20th century. And then eventually collapsed.
Wow.
And the same thing with the wheel. You could still see some pieces of it laying around.
Wow. Well, it certainly got its well-earned name of the Grand Mill for sure. We did have some additional questions, so I'm going to try to do these in order of the presentation. So at the beginning, you were talking about the style of like the undershot style. And so one of the questions was, is the grist mill in Metamora, Indiana? Is that an undershot? Do you happen to know?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think most of the ones around here are overshot, but I won't swear to that. It could be. I don't know.
Okay. Well, if you happen to find out, I have a feeling we're going to have you back again as a guest. So we'll we can make that the quiz question if anybody wants to do some research. Okay, so next question, and I'm pretty sure this one was from Mr. Pat Rafferty, is and you showed us a lot of maps, so this may have kind of been answered, but can you show where was the mill on Middle Creek? Pat wants to know.
Okay, let's go back to Boone County. That's Wolper Creek. I don't know if I have.
Try Bellevue.
Bellevue, Petersburg, Bellevue. Is this Middle Creek? That's Roberts Mill. All right, so there's Roberts Mill. That's on Middle Creek. There were earlier ones on Middle Creek that I think are just not on the map anymore because they were gone. There certainly was a mill on Middle Creek in 1810 because they applied for a license from the county. There have been several documented, some of the court order books on the Boone County Public Library's website, and you can go read those order books. And that's where I was looking for the early mills. And in 1810, there were, I think, 2 of them on Middle Creek. So I'm guessing there was probably another one somewhere maybe down a little further that's not there anymore. Sorry, there's lots of police going by my office.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. Middle Creek enters the farm and the Ohio River on our farm.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, I would expect that the earlier mills were either in the middle section or up here. I mean, Roberts Mill is what it was called in 1883. You know, it may have been one of those earlier names, Garnet or one of those other people, much earlier in time.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, and then one more question, Jeannine, from me. Um, so with all of these local, you talked about they're really local rural mills in a lot of cases, especially before, steam, but even then, what was their distribution method? I mean, did they, how far would they have maybe sold their products, and how did they get those out?
They didn't sell necessarily
Okay.
the product unless they ground their own corn and wheat.
Okay.
You would bring your wagon of corn,
Got it.
wheat to them, and then pay them to grind it for you.
For yourself. So it was
Right.
more that kind of thing. Okay.
Especially the smaller scale ones. I mean, if he processed 8,000 pounds of corn or wheat in 1850, whoever he was grinding it for was probably then packaging it and selling it.
Gotcha. Okay. So they were truly just the manufacturers.
Yeah, they were like the means to the end, and whether that was somebody taking it back home again, or selling it. And I would guess that they probably packaged their own, or maybe they took some in kind as payment and then sold that. So you could probably go there and buy 5 pounds of flour that maybe the miller had grown himself and then ground up.
Gotcha. Dan has an interesting question. Are there any records of how fine this stone ground grain would have been compared to today? And did any of the locals ever write a manual about for milling?
That would be interesting. I have not seen a manual. My guess it would be similar to what you would buy in the Smoky Mountains today.
Yeah.
I did see, I don't know if I have it in here. I did see a note in my big giant stack of handwritten research, that some of them also did hominy. And hominy is obviously the rough ground, very rough, to make hominy. So some of them had the means to adjust the grinding wheels.
Gotcha. Well, I know from personal experience, the whole wheat that we bought in the Smokies was pretty rough. Not the finest. We're not going to make very fine like pizza dough with it. Probably not. It's like a banana bread flour. Well, that is really interesting. We really appreciate. I just knew very little about this and never had thought about mills in Northern Kentucky. So definitely appreciate you bringing this topic up. And we need to find out, though, who had the first grist mill in Campbell County.
Do we have any answers?
We have 2 answers, and they're different. So we'll see if either of these gentlemen got the right answer.
James Taylor, of course.
Oh, no correct answers tonight. Okay.
Oh, Taylor Creek between Bellevue and Newport.
There you go. 1790.
I doubt he was the miller himself, but
Probably not.
he held the license. And then, of course,
Oh,
he bought that other one over there on Banquet Creek by 1810. So
well, you stumped them.
right. I thought that was going to be a gimme.
All right.
It was like connected to everything. So
Good point.
I want to do an exhibit called The 6 Degrees of James Taylor.
That would be a good one. Maybe we should do a segment on him sometime. Well, let's see. I want to make sure everyone hears about next week. I was just going to make a quick plug that if you would like to watch any of Jeannine's previous presentations or any of the past now 16 other episodes of Northern Kentucky History Hour, They are all available on Behringer-Crawford Museum's Facebook page, and they're also being uploaded onto YouTube. So if you missed something and you'd like to go back and listen, the other thing, just to be aware, someone posted this today on Facebook. If you ever have any trouble for some reason with your Zoom account, and you just wanted to listen in a different way, oops, you can always listen on Facebook as well, because we're streaming live. So also a great way to support us in this crazy little project we have going on weekly is please tell your friends and invite them. They're welcome to join us on Zoom and or on Facebook. So thanks so much for that. Okay, so next week we are going to be talking about a topic that's gotten some mention in the press the last 6 months or so, which is the Spanish flu. So the last major pandemic that affected so many people. So we'll have a guest from Kenton County Library talking about the flu of 1918 and the impact specifically on Northern Kentucky. So I hope everyone comes back and joins us for that presentation. And meanwhile, thanks again to all of you, to our members, to the staff, trustees of Behringer-Crawford Museum. I see John Bowe there, and Gary Johnson has joined us, and probably a few others. I'm sorry, there's so many names. Sometimes I can't see everyone. But thanks again. And Jeannine, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great night. Take care, everybody. Thank you.